General Hospital will reveal interesting details on Thursday, May 29, 2025. First, Cody sat with his head in his hands, the weight of guilt pressing on his shoulders like an immovable stone. The choice to help Lulu investigate Joe's past had seemed right at the time, driven by a desire to uncover the truth. But now, in the aftermath, as he watched the emotional fallout unfold, all he could feel was regret. Joe's reaction had been devastating. An explosion of betrayal, confusion, and pain that no one had been prepared for. Cody couldn't shake the thought that maybe he had gone too far, that perhaps the truth had come at too steep a price. The look in Joe's eyes when he learned who his real parents were haunted Cody, making him question if he had ruined a young man's life beyond repair. Sasha, ever intuitive and calm, had watched Cody unravel with a quiet concern. She knew what it meant to carry guilt, to question every decision in hindsight. Sitting beside him, she didn't speak right away but instead offered him the kind of presence that soothed the soul. When she finally spoke, her words were gentle but firm. She reminded Cody that truth, no matter how painful, is never the enemy. What he and Lulu did wasn't cruel, it was courageous. They didn't expose Gio to hurt him. They did it because he deserved to know the truth about his life, his origins, and the people who loved him even from afar. The pain Gio was feeling now was real, yes, but it was also a bridge to something greater. Sasha explained that shock was a natural part of truth-telling. When lies and hidden histories come to light, they burn at first, like sunlight flooding a dark room. Gio was overwhelmed, and rightly so, but that didn't mean the truth should have remained buried. In her eyes, Cody and Lulu had broken a silence that had imprisoned not just Gio, but also Dante and Brooke Lynn, who had spent years lost in uncertainty, wondering what became of the child they once held in their arms. By bringing the truth to light, Cody had handed them a second chance at being a family. Painful as it was also powerful. The healing could now begin. She also reminded him that Gio, in time, would come to understand. Right now, the boy was navigating an emotional storm unlike anything he'd ever faced. But beneath the rage and confusion was a heart that longed for answers. And now that the truth was out, there was room for new beginnings. Dante and Brooke Lynn had found their son, and no matter how complicated things might be, they now had the opportunity to love him in the open, without secrets, without shame. That kind of love, Sasha believed, was worth the temporary heartbreak. Cody listened quietly, letting Sasha's words sink into the places where his self-doubt had festered. He still felt the weight of Joe's pain, but something had shifted. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of something, it was the beginning. The storm would eventually pass, and when it did, perhaps Gio would see that everything that had happened was not an attack, but an act of love. Love that sometimes reveals itself in uncomfortable truths and difficult choices. Cody didn't need to punish himself any longer. He had done what he believed was right, and now it was time to trust that healing would follow. As Sasha stood and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, Cody finally looked up. He wasn't sure how the future would unfold for Gio or for himself, but for the first time since the truth had come out, he didn't feel paralyzed by shame. There was still pain ahead, but also hope, a fragile but powerful force that Sasha had helped him rediscover. In that moment, Cody realized that telling the truth didn't destroy Joe's life. It set it free. And now, it was up to everyone, himself included, to help Gio learn how to live it. Second, Lulu stood motionless by the window, her heart racing with anxiety as she waited for the inevitable confrontation. She had known this moment was coming ever since the truth about Gio had come to light. What had begun as a heated argument with Lois had spiraled into something much larger. Something that could not be undone. Gio had overheard fragments of that conversation, and those fragments had shattered his entire world. Lulu had tried to piece everything back together, to undo the pain she had never meant to cause, but it was too late. Now, Dante was on his way to confront her, and she feared that whatever remained between them would be tested beyond repair. When Dante arrived, the tension between them was immediate and suffocating. His anger wasn't loud or theatrical. It was quiet, restrained, but cutting with every word. He asked how she could let this happen, how she could be so careless knowing how fragile Gio was. Lulu didn't try to defend herself. She knew there were no excuses. Her voice trembled as she admitted what had happened. She had argued with Lois, emotions had run high, and in the heat of the moment, the truth had slipped out. She hadn't known Gio was nearby. She hadn't realized he was listening. But he had been. And what he heard had broken him. Lulu's regret poured out like a confession. She recounted the moments after, the helplessness she felt watching Gio retreat into silence and heartbreak. She had tried to explain, tried to reach him, but the wall had already gone up. Nothing she said seemed to matter anymore. He had shut her out completely. The guilt consumed her, not just for what was said, but for the way she had failed to protect him from the truth. She knew that some truths could not be hidden forever, but this wasn't how it was supposed to unfold. Not with so much pain, not with so much chaos. She looked at Dante, her eyes pleading not for forgiveness but for understanding. Whatever had happened between them, Gio was still their son, and he needed them. Lulu knew she couldn't fix the damage alone, but maybe Dante could reach him. She asked him, begged him, to go to Gio. Not to blame or interrogate him, but to hold him, to be the steady presence that Gio so desperately needed. The boy was lost in a storm of betrayal and confusion, and more than anything, he needed his father to help anchor him again. Dante's expression softened just slightly as he absorbed her words. He could see the pain in Lulu's eyes, the sincerity in her voice. She wasn't the enemy. She was a mother who had made a terrible mistake, one she would regret for the rest of her life. And now, she was asking for something selfless, not for herself, but for their son. Whatever anger he felt toward her, whatever disappointment lingered, none of it mattered more than helping Gio find his footing again. The boy was hurting, and Dante knew it was time to put aside everything else and simply be the father his son needed. As Dante turned to leave, Lulu didn't follow. She stood still, watching him disappear down the hall, clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, something good could still come from all this pain. She knew that healing wouldn't happen overnight, that trust couldn't be rebuilt in a single conversation. But if Dante could reach Gio, if he could make their son feel safe again, then perhaps this wasn't the end of everything. Perhaps, through the broken pieces, a new beginning could still be found. Third, Michael stood just outside the doorway, the cool air from the hallway clinging to his jacket as he paused for a moment, unsure of how to take the next step. It had been months since he had left Port Charles, months of painful recovery, isolation, and reflection in a German clinic where time seemed to stretch endlessly. And now, after all the waiting and silence, he was back. The hospital, the courtroom battles, the fractured family ties, all of it waited just beyond this reunion. But right now, none of it mattered more than the man standing in front of him, Jason. A figure who had been more than just a friend or mentor, but something far deeper, something almost paternal. Jason turned at the sound of the door and for a moment, his breath caught in his chest. There stood Michael, thinner than before but alive, standing tall with eyes that carried the weight of everything he had endured. The room was filled with silence for a second too long, the air thick with emotion neither of them had prepared for. And then, as if something broke open between them, Jason crossed the room and pulled Michael into a tight embrace. It wasn't just a greeting, it was a reunion of souls, bound by love and loss, and by everything they had survived. Neither man spoke at first, letting the silence say what words couldn't. When they finally pulled apart, the tension broke into a mixture of smiles and tears. Jason placed a hand on Michael's shoulder, studying his face as if to confirm he was truly there. He asked how the treatment had gone, how Michael had held up in the long months of absence, and whether the pain had dulled at all. Michael gave quiet answers, nodding slowly, his voice filled with gratitude and exhaustion. He didn't have to say how hard it had been, Jason already knew. He had lived through his own darkness and recognized the shadows in Michael's eyes. Michael then asked about everything he had missed, his children, the ongoing chaos between Sonny and the rest of the family, and the quiet storms that had brewed in his absence. Jason updated him, trying to spare him from the heavier truths but knowing Michael wouldn't accept sugar-coated versions. There was so much to catch up on, so many wounds to gently reopen before they could be healed. Yet the weight felt lighter with Jason beside him. For the first time in weeks, Michael didn't feel alone in carrying it. As they sat together, side by side, the old familiarity returned slowly, like warmth creeping back into cold limbs. Jason had always been the steady force in Michael's life, the quiet protector who never demanded anything but gave everything. And for Jason, seeing Michael alive and back in his orbit brought an unspoken peace. He had feared the worst. Feared that Michael might never return, that too much damage had been done. But now, with Michael back in Port Charles, Jason felt something like hope stir again. Their reunion wasn't just about catching up, it was about anchoring themselves to each other again after being adrift for too long. As the sky outside began to darken, neither of them moved to leave. In that small, quiet moment, there was healing, not in grand gestures or dramatic words, but in the simple presence of two men who had walked through fire and come out the other side, still standing, still family. Fourth, the budding romance between Trina and Kai is about to be taken to a whole new level, as their connection evolves beyond mere companionship or fleeting private moments, and begins to deepen into something far more emotional and meaningful. Trina, with her sensitive heart hidden behind a strong exterior, slowly lets down her guard when she's around Kai. She feels a sincere warmth in every glance, every caring gesture he gives her, nothing flashy or overdone, but filled with empathy and authenticity. Kai, on the other hand, never thought he would fall in love again after the losses in his past. But Trina entered his life like a fresh breeze, full of vitality, intelligence, and a resilience that he deeply admired. He feels as if the wounds inside him are slowly healing with every smile she offers, every moment she quietly listens to things he's never shared with anyone else. Every time they're together, whether it's a quiet evening at a cafe or a fleeting glance amid a crowded street, their hearts beat faster. Their love doesn't arrive like a storm, it flows like gentle waves brushing the shore, gradually drawing closer and growing deeper. Both carry old wounds and unhealed scars, but that's what allows them to connect, to see each other's vulnerabilities and offer protection without judgment. Kai begins to consider changing parts of himself to be worthy of Trina's affection, while Trina learns to believe in a future with this man by her side. Then, everything shifts when an unexpected event thrusts them into danger, forcing them to choose between personal safety and trust in one another. In a moment of life and death, the way Kai looks at Trina is no longer just admiration, it's the gaze of a man willing to sacrifice himself to protect the woman he loves. Trina, too, realizes that despite her efforts to hide it, her heart had already fully belonged to Kai without her even knowing. After that ordeal, they no longer avoid their feelings. Every word, every embrace, every kiss now carries the undeniable truth that their love has truly begun. From a relationship once full of hesitation and doubt, Trina and Kai step into a new chapter, one where love is not just a fleeting emotion, but a journey of healing, of standing together through adversity, and of building a hopeful future side by side. Finally, Brooke Lynn sat across from her father, the late afternoon sunlight casting long shadows through the tall windows of the Quartermain living room. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the edge of the couch cushion, gathering the courage to speak. There had been a silence between them for too long, a silence filled with unspoken truths, aching guilt, and the kind of emotional weight that only a father and daughter could truly understand. Ned, sensing her unease, waited patiently, his expression soft, eyes filled with concern rather than judgment. He knew this conversation had been building for some time. Finally, with a shaky breath, Brooke began to speak. Her voice was quiet, but the words came with force, as if they had been trapped inside her for months. She told him everything, the secret she had carried about Gio, the choices she had made, and the pain that had followed. She admitted to the lies, to the fear that the truth would destroy everything she had tried to protect. She confessed the heartbreak of watching Gio grow up without knowing who he truly was, and the torment of seeing him now, confused and wounded by the revelations she had helped conceal. Ned listened without interruption, his hands folded in his lap, his heart breaking for the daughter he loved more than anything. When she finally finished, Brooke couldn't meet his eyes. She expected anger or disappointment, the kind of reaction that would solidify her deepest fears. But instead, what she heard was the soft sound of her father exhaling, a breath of release, not condemnation. He moved closer, placing a steady hand over hers, and in that moment, Brooke looked up to see nothing but love in his face. He wasn't angry. He wasn't ashamed. He was simply a father seeing his daughter in pain and wanting nothing more than to comfort her. Ned spoke gently, his words measured and calm. He told Brooke that while mistakes had been made, the most important thing now was what came next. He reminded her that family wasn't built on perfection, it was built on forgiveness, on truth, and on showing up when it mattered most. Gio might be hurting now, but the path to healing had finally begun, and it was paved with the very truth Brooke had feared to share. Ned praised her bravery for finally telling him, for facing what she had tried so hard to bury. He reminded her that being a parent, even from afar, was about doing what was right, even when it hurt. Tears welled in Brooke's eyes as her father's words wrapped around her like a blanket. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear his reassurance, how much she had been carrying the burden alone. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to lean into his embrace, resting her head on his shoulder like she used to when she was a little girl. In that quiet space, surrounded by family history and shared pain, there was a sense of peace, a fragile, tentative peace, but one that felt real. As they sat together in silence, the storm outside their family began to feel more distant. Ned knew there was still much to be done, bridges to rebuild, trust to regain, but in that moment, nothing mattered more than his daughter's courage and his unwavering support for her. No matter how painful the truth had been, it had also opened the door to healing. And in that truth, father and daughter found their way back to each other.